Hey, and welcome to the Solid Verbal. Now would be a perfect time to consider subscribing. Yeah, that little subscribe button for year-round premium college football content. That's it. Here's the video. Enjoy. Subscribe.
Welcome back to the Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name, as always, Ty Hildebrand. His name, as always, Dan Rubenstein. Pleased to have you back on the podcast. Mr. Rubenstein, how are you, fine sir?
I'm doing better. Voice-wise, I know I probably sound a little bit different than I usually do, but I'm better than I was when we recorded our little emergency hit when Paul Christ was relieved of his duties Sunday evening. We're recording this Tuesday midday. I just had to glance over and check at the time and the day because that's who I am as a human. But I'm good, Ty. I always love these Q&A episodes, and not many of them get released to the public because it's a special bonus feature for our subscribers on verballers.com, on our Patreon, which is just incredible. So I'm always happy to interact and bounce things off of them and bounce things off of you.
I am as well. This episode, all of our episodes, driven by our good friends over at Geico. Do not forget, if you're in the New York area, on Friday, October the 7th, we are doing College Football, the game show. We have begun preparations. The show is going to be awesome. I am looking forward very much to this show. A lot of moving pieces.
Oh, it's going to be so good.
Pulling sounds from all sorts of different places. Odd crevasses around the interwebs. But this is coming together in a way I'm really excited
good crevasse.
SolidVerbal.live.com/smelltieshair.com if you are ever so inclined. As Dan mentioned, today's show is a Q&A show. We don't get to typically do a whole lot of these during the season because there's just games to discuss.
Right.
We generally will save the Q&A stuff for our Brew&A, which you can find, as Dan mentioned earlier, over at verballers.com. We do it live every Thursday morning for those of you who want to hop on over, not just get in the Discord, but also participate live. We do a lot of Q&A stuff during the year. This is one of the few weeks where we're going to do it just for the general public. We do them often in the off season. Now, after the benefit of 1 month of the college football season, the calendar has turned to October. We know a little bit more about these teams, right?
I hope
starting
so.
Starting to get our feet wet with respect to the 2022 college football season. Why don't we dive right in and answer some of your Verballer questions?
Congratulations, Skippy. You've got mail.
You've got mail on the Solid Verbal.
As often as we can, Dan, we pay homage to the Verballerhood. And let's start on today's show with Heather.
Okay.
Not including your alma mater and or team that you like to root for. If you could coach one college football team in any division, which team would you choose and why? If you'd like to elaborate. Thank you, Heather. And we will elaborate. Appreciate the question.
So is this just in general or this year's squad or recent squads? Ty, how do you interpret this?
I think this is a free response from Heather. I think you can interpret it however you want. Let me give you my answer to start.
Okay.
My answer for a good long time has generally been Vanderbilt. I believe Vanderbilt to be the perfect job.
Really?
Because here's why. Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Here's why. First off, the pressure is low. Not like super low. You're in the SEC, but
Right.
generally lower than your counterparts in the conference. You are inarguably the best / close to the richest conference in college football, so resources not necessarily an issue. You're in a cool place to live, Nashville, Tennessee.
Sure.
And anytime you do something good, it will be magnified and you will be made to be a hero in the college football world because all we ever hear is how hard it is to win at Vanderbilt, right? James Franklin's built a career on those few seasons that he was at Vanderbilt and did a good job. And he continued to do a good job at Penn State, generally speaking. But you do well at Vanderbilt, you become something of a folk hero in college football world. So for me, Vandy's an answer. I think along the same lines, Illinois has been one of my answers for a good long time.
You want to live in Champaign?
I've never been to Champaign.
I don't think you want to live in Champaign. All due respect.
Maybe I don't want to live in Champaign, but
yeah.
But my point is just it's a pressure thing. It's a pressure thing. Now, maybe that will change in light of what's going on this year at Illinois with Brett Bielema, and he's obviously got the Illini playing to a pretty exciting level of football.
Right.
But for a good long time, the pressure at Illinois just wasn't there. You could have a good long career without having to worry about turning gray at a young age. And anytime you would go above and beyond, that was the kind of thing that again would kind of christen you a folk hero in the world of college football.
Yeah, I would just coach Arizona State because for a lot of the similar reasons, you can be good and not great and have a job for a long time. You can attract good assistants. You can recruit Southern California. Arizona has gotten better. You can go into Texas. You can live in a warm place. You can eat pretty well. I know that's not important to all of us, but like it just in terms of a lifestyle, you can do worse than the Metro Phoenix area. You can win games, but the expectation is not that, especially now with USC and UCLA losing. Like if the Pac-10, 12, whatever it's going to become, isn't looked at as a major pressure cooker of a conference, if you're merely good, often, you're kind of set there. So I think ASU is an interesting answer. I think TCU is an interesting answer for a similar reason, right? That the expectations aren't huge, but it's also not a situation like Vandy where you're going to just get your teeth kicked in all the time, and you just have to absorb it. And you have to convince kids that, yeah, sometimes we're going to play Georgia. Sometimes we're going to play Bama. Sometimes we're going to play a better Tennessee or a better LSU, and we're going to lose 51-7. You cool with that? So it's the bummer of ASU should always be competitive enough to hang with really strong teams in their conference. But at the same time, if you win 8 or 9 a year, it's blank check. It's an absolute, well, maybe not a blank check in the Pac-12, but a sizable check will come your way pretty often. Now, will TCU hire a coach with the last name Rubenstein at Texas Christian University? Well, maybe not. Maybe not. But I see that as another opportunity where you can hire good coaches. You know, there's a lot of good FCS schools, smaller group of 5 schools, whatever, where you can sort of have your pick of up-and-coming assistants. Obviously, you can recruit well and get blue chips from the DFW area and beyond. You have a dedicated fan base that will just be happy that if you don't do something disastrously and you go to a bowl all the time, nobody's going to be disappointed unless you're getting blown out by Baylor, by SMU. Everybody's going to be pretty happy if you're winning 9 games a year and going to the Alamo Bowl.
Let me pivot off of this and ask kind of a follow-up question.
Yeah.
We are all answering teams that are not on that top rung.
Yeah.
Even in that top 20 rung.
Yeah.
If you had to pick one of the blue blood programs, the Notre Dames, the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Texas, the Oklahoma, the US, like really the prominent teams.
Yeah.
That at least recently or somewhat recently have had their hat in the ring for the championship. If you're picking on that level, which school are you going with?
Oh God, in terms of like how easy or not easy my life is at one of those places, like it seems like it would be really, really, really difficult to screw up Ohio State at this point. Like you're actually thinking about the jobs where there's the least resistance within your conference, that things are behind you in terms of infrastructure to give you every opportunity in the world to build a top 5 roster, and that it would be hard to win 9 games or 8 games, right? With the things available to you at Ohio State. I don't necessarily want to live in Columbus, Ohio. I've been, and I think it's totally fine. I've enjoyed it at different times of the year. But if I'm having my druthers, I'm incorporating geography into this, and just not my move personally. But of those jobs, if we're strictly looking at that in terms of like you're living in the facility anyway, what is the hardest to screw up? Now, there's a ton of pressure as the head coach at Ohio State. But with the day-to-dayness of Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Texas. Now, Texas would be a good time, but like I just don't see it as being set up booster-wise and infrastructure-wise to succeed in the way that Ohio State is. So in terms of the most difficult job to screw up at this point, it's probably Ohio State.
Let's go over to beat U of A.
Okay.
How much patience should fans of a program that has maybe started to plateau have with their coach? I.e. Wisconsin giving the heave-ho to Paul Chryst after 2 merely average seasons, or Iowa State fans getting impatient with Matt Campbell not moving them to the next level. Does it matter if your expectations are sky-high / borderline unreasonable? Think John Cooper at Ohio State, Frank Solich at Nebraska, Brian Kelly at Notre Dame, or having a more mediocre to bad history. So there's a couple questions in there.
Right.
this is obviously predicated somewhat on what happened to Paul Chryst. Now, we haven't had a whole lot of an opportunity to talk about the Paul Chryst situation on the podcast, given the fact that it happened as it always does on a Sunday after we hit the stop button. So perhaps we can discuss that a little bit now and use Paul Chryst as a go-by for the rest of college football. Paul Chryst recently, as in last week, lost by 24 at home to Illinois. Mm-hmm. Illinois is not what it was in years past. Brett Bielema has them playing well. They're a 4-1 team at time of recording. But the manner in which Wisconsin lost was particularly troubling. And the way that the offense has looked so far, despite bringing over a new offensive coordinator, it's not been very appealing. It's just not given anyone the impression that things are going in a good direction. So, by surprise, Wisconsin decides they're moving on from Paul Chryst, supposedly after a lengthy chat with Mr. Chryst. They've also negotiated down his buyout to somewhere in the $11 million range. I believe that's down from about 19 or 18, somewhere in there.
Right.
So Paul Chryst, a native son of Wisconsin, doing his part, I guess, on some level to help the university not take the full buyout and allow them to put it towards a new coach. So who knows who the new guy is going to be? We can maybe talk about that if we want. But we did put out a call in our videos and in the short snippet that we recorded after the fact that we wanted folks to write in, Wisconsin fans to write in and let us know what their thoughts were on the hiring. You will not be surprised to learn that 100% of the messages we received were in favor of this move.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to get rid of Paul Chryst, and not even like in a mean way. The people who emailed in were very, very friendly.
The people connected to
it.
Wisconsin, right? The Wisconsin fans that are closest to the situation. Fans.
Yeah. I mean, everybody was very diplomatic about it. I think everybody has the utmost respect for Paul Chryst. But the general sentiment that I got is it was time. You could see it on the field. We're happy to see them move on. There also is an assumption that Jim Leonard, the now interim coach / defensive coordinator, is going to be the next guy up for the job. That will all work itself out in due time. But before we even get into this question from Beat U of A, now that we've had a couple days to process the news, Dan, the Paul Chryst thing, how surprising was it to you? And was it the right move to make at this time?
An incredible surprise, not because it wasn't worth a conversation and not because it wasn't unjustified, but just because with a lot of these guys who have succeeded, which there are not many on the level of Paul Chryst, in terms of the bowls, in terms of the wins, whatever. I mean, he's won 10 games and went to the Rose Bowl in 2019, right?
Yep.
And Wisconsin to date has done a lot of excellent things, sometimes on offense, sometimes on defense, sometimes developing higher level NFL players. Like, do they have the best running back in the NFL? I don't follow the NFL closely enough, but I know Jonathan Taylor's in that conversation, right? So develop legit superstars at the next level at the moment. So I just figured that this situation would have been either overhaul your coaching staff or done in December. Now, because of the current mechanics of the sport being that there is a signing day in December, teams are doing everything they can to make a decision that they know they're going to make as early as possible because of keeping together a recruiting class or giving that next guy all the time in the world to quickly assemble a recruiting class to sign in December and February, right? To sort of lock in those relationships. So just with regard to Wisconsin, it falls under the thing we talked about last year, I think, where there's going to be sort of an older guard falling off in the coaching community that doesn't necessarily want to be as proactive in the portal, as proactive with NIL stuff, and that doesn't fully want to I'm trying to think of the right word here. That doesn't fully want to admit the current realities of the sport. That this isn't how it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was an assistant, when I was a young head coach or whatever, and football is football and everybody else is doing it and passing you by. Now, Wisconsin has not been able to develop a quarterback during the Chryst era in the way that a lot of schools that Wisconsin beats are able to. And ultimately, I think that what was the term, backslide, that Wisconsin fans have used a lot. When you look at the recruiting trail with Wisconsin, when you look at quarterback development, when you look at the ability to hire or maintain assistants or change things on offense, Wisconsin has been this program that, and I'm sure you had this in your school. What was your high school GPA, Ty? If you don't mind me asking. I know it's very personal. Whatever region it was.
Yeah. It was, I think with AP credits, probably above a 4. I don't remember
Really?
exactly what.
Damn.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can't relate to this.
Exactly what it was.
So mine was, I don't know, 3.6, 3.7. I don't know. It was somewhere that was like in that B+, A- range. I was a totally okay student. I was a pretty good test taker, a good essay writer, whatever, but I didn't do my homework. I didn't study for the little tests, and I didn't do as well on them. Wisconsin always did its busy work, right? Wisconsin would always beat this year's iteration of Illinois. They didn't sort of wait for the big games to show up. They showed up every single week and beat the brains out of everybody who was lesser or around the same level because they were so well coached. Guys always stuck around in Wisconsin, developed, played as upperclassmen, and the system was just infuriatingly efficient. That fell off, right? So in terms of patience, when you look at underlying issues that Wisconsin has always done X well, Wisconsin has always done Y well. And it's a development place, right? They're never going to put together top 15 classes and string those together, but they're going to find those 3 stars, develop them for a couple of years before they see serious time on the field. And then they thrive. And then they are part of a top 5 national defense or one of the best offensive lines in the country, whatever. They stick to what they do and they do it well. When that goes, it seems it's hard to get it back. And so I don't know if it's the specific Illinois loss and the symbolic nature of it being Brett Bielema being the guy on the other side of the field and essentially out Wisconsining Wisconsin with that run defense and Chase Brown. It can't feel good, right? Maybe it was the symbolic nature of that specific loss. But I think it's sort of a toothpaste in the tube type situation. You can't point to, well, he's got a top 8 recruiting class, like maybe Louisville can with Scott Satterfield with his ridiculous class, at least at the moment, coming in. You can't point to competitive losses with Nebraska bringing back Scott Frost because of how Nebraska played against Ohio State and Michigan and all these teams, Oklahoma. So the manner, which is the word you use that we've been using a lot, I think is an overwhelming part of this, that there's nothing that Wisconsin and the administrators of Wisconsin can point to. Yes, but at least this looks like it's going to be a bright spot for years to come. That's the issue to me, is practice patience when it's early and there are signs of growth. And right now, it just seems that Wisconsin's trying to do what it always did well, and they're doing it poorly. And that's hard to reverse course.
Yeah. I mean, so much of college football right now is trading on potential success.
Sure.
Trading on potential dollars that could follow down the line if somebody, if you catch lightning in a bottle and you could put the right coach in the right spot at the right time, build a program up in time for this incredible windfall of cash that is upon us now in college football.
Yeah.
Programs could really stand to benefit from that. And I think the manner in which a program has conducted itself here, obviously through the early part of 2022. That's been a story as we've seen coaches be relieved of duties for the last 4 weeks running. But if it just doesn't feel like there is momentum in a positive direction at a place like Wisconsin, for as much as it sucks to see, by all accounts, a good guy like Paul Chryst lose his job, it also makes a lot of sense. Wisconsin is seeing the writing on the wall here with respect to the Big Ten, and there is this feeling, I think, that you have to make a change now, otherwise you're going to be left behind. What's interesting to me on the coaching candidate front is, and I know there's this assumption that Jim Leonhard is probably going to be the guy at Wisconsin. We will find out, right? We will find out. They have essentially given him like 7 games now,
right?
6-7 games to figure out what can he do with the talent on hand. How can he make that better, different, vice versa? And he's essentially got an audition here. So I think if this goes well, he's probably the guy. I would also be stunned if they didn't make a call to Lance Leipold.
Sure.
Because Lance Leipold was at Wisconsin Whitewater, where he did great things before obviously moving over to Buffalo and then going down to Kansas, and now has Kansas at an undefeated mark of 5-0 and number 19th in the country. So Jim Leonhard, I think, is in a really interesting spot here. And I saw Bruce Feldman, our friend Bruce Feldman from Fox Sports and The Athletic, said that if you're a Nebraska fan, you want Jim Leonhard to win all his games. Because that reduces the likelihood that they're going to go out and try to get Lance Leipold. I don't know if Lance Leipold is leaving Kansas, but if he wants to, he will have options, not the least of which is Wisconsin and obviously Nebraska.
It would be the easiest thing for Wisconsin for Jim Leonhard to be really strong. That's all they're hoping for in the athletic department right now is, please, Jim Leonhard, be clearly strong and a difference maker and, have a different vision for this offense and get this defense playing better up front, especially with what Illinois was able to do. So, because that's the seamless Wisconsin way that has worked for them, right? They hired Gary Anderson was an outside hire, and that obviously, he's just a different guy, whatever. That was just probably never going to work out in the long term. But Brett Bielema being internal, obviously Paul Chryst with his longtime experience in Wisconsin, that Jim Leonard, he's only been at Wisconsin. He's still a young guy, just his coaching career-wise. And the recruiting class presumably would be in a really good place, and even if it's not that strong, which it isn't at the moment, it's in the 50s, I believe, you'll resonate on the trail with Jim Leonard in Wisconsin, in Ohio, and Michigan, whatever, not to do a Howard Dean impression, but you could see that in this world where, look at the schools that have hired really young coaches. When you look at, Oregon and Notre Dame, even guys in their 40s, Florida, Brian Kelly well into his 80s. Now, that is going to be, I think there's going to be that divide where the older guard is going to fall off, and Jim Leonard absolutely represents upside of a younger guard Wisconsin.
By the way, before we go any further on this one,
you got a sound?
I
Lock of the week.
Who are they playing this week?
They're at Northwestern. They're favored by 10. I think Wisconsin will destroy.
Oh, that's right. They're here.
Yeah, I think Wisconsin will absolutely annihilate Northwestern this week. So there's one of my locks. We probably won't even talk about that game on the preview show, but I've already bet that game -10. All right,
-10.
The question here, just getting back to this, is basically how much patience should a school show?
Yeah,
if they feel as if their program has plateaued. So we have seen, I think, a lack of patience on some level, maybe with respect to the Paul Chryst thing,
right?
To a greater degree than, let's say, what we saw at Nebraska, right? Nebraska, it sort of plateaued in the wrong direction. Wisconsin's at least been pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I think personally, given where we're at in college football, I think the way that Wisconsin handled it was probably the right way. I think they recognized, they could see the writing on the wall. They could sense that they were on the verge of being left behind if they didn't make a move and try to change things and shift the momentum, shift the narrative. And so they made the move. The question I think is more applicable to a place like dare I say an Auburn. Auburn hasn't really been there over the last couple years, but he also mentions Matt Campbell and Iowa State, which is, I think, an interesting example.
Right.
There is this sense with Iowa State that they've had good players, kind of waiting for them to get to the next gear. I doubt it'll happen this year. We're going to talk about the Iowa State Kansas State game tomorrow when we do our previews. Mm-hmm. They're still doing a lot wrong. Is Matt Campbell, stagnant? Should Iowa State show patience with him, or patience, Dan? Patience is the name of the question. What do you think?
It's the line of thinking being good being the enemy of the great. Is that what the cliche is? Good is the enemy of great. And the worry for a lot of places is that you end up firing Frank Solich, right? And then rotating cast of coaches who Frank Solich only won 9 or 10 games a year in Nebraska. We expect better. That's pretty good. Now, they had moments with Bo Pelini, of course, but they've been in a funk, and that's like a big, bright, shining example. What I go back to is how many schools truly regret making that move when it seemed like the necessary thing to do? How many coaches have proven on a big public stage that they were let go because of on-field results or lack thereof, and when they went to their next job, that, it turns out that school made a mistake and their standard was too high and they should have appreciated what they had. Now you can go back to
very rarely, right?
It's not super often. It happens. Now you can go back to Minnesota and, some of the struggles they had. There was, I don't remember, it was Stu Mandel or somebody, like the Glenn Mason line, where it's like, you should be happy with 6 or 7 wins. And, you hire a couple coaches who don't get you there. And then it looks like a particularly terrible time to be Minnesota or something like that. But I don't have a problem with schools holding themselves to a standard and saying, we should win 8 games. We should win 7 games. We should be a bowl team. We're Iowa State. We're committed to football. I don't think Iowa State is going anywhere with Matt Campbell. And I phrased that wrong. I don't think Iowa State is saying, can we do better than Matt Campbell? right?
No.
They've been
I
down
think Matt
enough.
Campbell is welcome as long as he's willing to stay.
Correct. And so there is not a world to me in which Iowa State can realistically say Matt Campbell has an 8 or 9 win ceiling and we think we can get to the next level with a better guy. That doesn't exist in Ames. I think people in Ames, just big picture, are thrilled with the Matt Campbell era, right? Because you've seen the down days. You've seen long stretches of down days. And so there are very few places, unless you're not making a bowl game and you're Arizona State and you're Nebraska or you're Florida or one of those schools. Like, yeah, we should be winning 8 games and progressing. There are schools that have a history of it, that there's proof that they can win 8, 9, 10 games a season. And if they're not getting there and it's clearly a fixable reason why they're not getting there, then yes, I think patience can be thrown out the window. But I'm also like, it's look at the underlying facts of the program, right, Ty?
Absolutely. Let's go to Blessed Alua from our Patreon.
Yes.
What's wrong with the Houston Cougars? What is wrong with the Houston Cougars? So, I've got the stat profile in front of me.
Okay.
Houston right now is 2-3. They beat UTSA, that thriller, in week 1.
Mm-hmm.
They also beat Rice. Rice, not as bad of a team as we maybe thought at the start of the year.
Right.
3 losses to Texas Tech, Kansas, and Tulane. At quick blush,
Ooh.
kind of everything.
Really?
Kind of everything with Houston. We were pretty high on the Cougs coming into this year.
Yes.
We were really high on the Cougars. We like Clayton Tune. It felt like, to some extent, Dana Holgorsen, snake bitten for one reason or another, that this was going to be the season that they put it all together. I will say, this is not an easy schedule.
I think
It's not an easy schedule by any stretch.
all of these offenses, short of Rice, who's actually run the ball pretty well this year, are pretty feisty. Like, this is
They're
not an
feisty.
embarrassing record for Houston.
No.
With regard to their opponents. With regard to expectations, yes, it is a little embarrassing.
With regard to expectations, it is a bit embarrassing. What I will say is that the efficiency numbers don't really like Houston all that much, especially on defense. The defense, by all accounts, looks like it is pretty much collapsed. Pretty much collapsed.
They were really strong last year.
Yeah. And so you see that bottom out in the manner that it has. They're not playing the run all that well. That is just not a great formula. Offensively, where obviously Dana Holgorsen has made a lot of hay over his time, they're also stunningly inefficient. And so you combine those two things against teams that can play offense, against teams that, are at a minimum average, and there's your issue, right? Now, we can dig much deeper if we really wanted, but what we're getting from this profile is that Houston is just not getting any bang for the buck. That whatever they're doing out there is not maximizing their situations, not maximizing their players' potential.
Yeah. I mean, they're also just losing really close games. Situationally, they are not executing. And now they're in those situations because of a defense that's sort of fallen off the cliff, an offensive line that hasn't really protected Clayton Tune all that well. There's a lot of little things they did last year that they're not doing this year. But, if they come up with that big pick against Texas Tech, I think it was in overtime. It was late, right? And it's turning that into points, and that's the game. And they didn't, right? So, again, Tulane's pretty good. We know Kansas is pretty good. We know Texas Tech is at least frisky. They beat Texas. And so it's coming up big in moments that they probably wouldn't have found themselves in last year. But no, I don't know if it's an execution thing. I don't know if it's an injury thing. I don't know if it's a depth thing. They haven't a clear number one receiver who's been made plays in Tank Dell. But no, when saddled with these expectations, especially as they head into the Big 12, for whatever reason, game to game, they just have not been there.
Have not been there. No. And you mentioned the line. I mean, a lot of penalties on the line, too.
The free yardage.
I think they're last. I believe they are last nationally in offensive line penalties per game.
Yeah.
They're like 5.5 penalties per game. That's double the national average. So that points to miscommunication on some level. That points to coaching, right? I talked about that with respect to Notre Dame. They've been there, too, as they kind of transition into this new regime. So we'll have to keep an eye on whether or not things go in the right direction for Houston. I do think it gets easier as the schedule gets into, mid-October, all throughout November. There should be easier wins along the way, and hopefully this thing will balance out. But it's been a tough go.
Sure.
It's been a tough go, to say the least. Let's go over to Kyle, kind of along the same lines here.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a Dan Rubenstein special, this question.
Okay.
Going into next football season, you are granted the ability to see the same stat for both teams, not including final score, for every game of the season.
Yeah.
Which stat do you think would be most beneficial in predicting the outcome of those games? So this is like a blind study.
Mm-hmm.
We can't see the final score. All we can see is Team A had this, Team B had that. Based on that stat alone, as a predictor for who won or lost the game. Which stat are you going with?
Can I use a Bill Connolly stat?
You can use whatever you want.
All right, then I'll just go with the stat that he says is most indicative of who wins games, and that's explosive play rate. Yeah, I'll just, how often that you are able to generate and prevent explosive plays is the single most telling, more than turnovers, more than anything, the single most telling stat about who wins games most often. So it's generating and preventing. So I don't know if there's a net number there, or a net percentage, whatever it is. That's what I would look at. If you were to show me Oregon's schedule and show me how often they were able to generate and prevent, or you were to show me Mississippi State, or you were to show me Florida A&M, whatever, across football, to me, that's what I would take, and that's what I would think would continue to be the most predictive as both units evolve in the sport.
Sure. You kind of took my answer because I, too, have had the benefit of many Bill C conversations.
Yeah.
So explosive play rate is a big one. That's probably
By the way,
the right
Dan
answer.
Klobuchar in the comments. Point differential. Yeah, it's a good one.
Point
It's a good
differential is
stat
another
that
one for sure.
indicates
Thank you, Dan.
Wins and losses. Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. The most logical amongst the verballers.
Yeah.
Here's another one that I can throw out that I look at. I like third downs. I like third down conversions. I think that tells you a lot about a team. There is some luck involved with that.
Yeah.
Right. It's not always a perfect metric, but if you see a team went 10 for 16 on third downs, that's generally a case that the offense is doing what it's supposed to do, and maybe the defense can't get off the field.
Mm-hmm.
Vice versa, if you see 2 out of 16, then you know that the offense really struggled against the defense. And I would think more often than not, that team's not winning a whole lot of games.
Right.
So a bunch of these little data points that you could use, none of them are perfect, but since you want explosive play rate, let me go third down conversions.
Yeah, by the way, the old Bill Walsh stat, I forget what the official name for it is, like in open play is how it's described from Bill Connolly's stats, is the percentage of first downs that come on first and second down, I think is
staying ahead of the chains, right?
Yeah, staying ahead of the chains, especially because, explosive play rate ties into that. How often you're able to generate first downs quickly, it probably helps to be able to generate those explosive plays. But that's a big one too, because you talk about third downs. If you don't face a lot of third downs, that's also amazing.
From Steven, Dan, if you could build a full team with an offense from one team and a defense from another, how would you build that team?
So of 2022's offenses and defenses?
I think so.
Let me pull up a list of teams, Ty.
I mean, Ohio State's the offense, right? Ohio State's got to be the offense.
Probably. At this point, with how much more consistent, like there's no shame in only scoring what they score against Notre Dame, 21.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any shame in that performance, especially without Jackson Smith and Jigba and, the full weaponry of receiving and Mayan Williams and knowing what he now is.
In week one.
Yeah.
In week one, right? I mean, so much of what we saw in week one kind of goes out the window. I do think Ohio State is starting to rev up that offense and starting to get to the heights that we expected. And they're doing so even without Jackson Smith and Jigba,
Right.
who will be back at some point this season. And Trey Henderson, didn't play last week. So this is an incredibly loaded offense, which is part of why I still believe they're going to win the national championship. But on the defensive side, we have options, right?
Georgia.
Georgia. Is Georgia's defense as good as we expected?
Against Oregon, yes. Against Kent State, against Mizzou, maybe not. I can tell you what the points per drive, the Danalytics metrics that I prefer. The number one defense in America, just in terms of points per drive allowed, is Minnesota. Number 2 is Georgia. Alabama's 5. James Madison, number 4, Ty.
Oh, do we want to go Maddie's here?
Penn State,
could be a controversial
6.
choice.
Ole Miss 9. I'm just looking
Where's
at double
Michigan?
digits. Illinois is number 3, Ty. Where's Michigan's defense? Michigan is number 2.
Yeah.
But again, who are the
Michigan's
quarterbacks
an
Michigan has
interesting
played,
answer.
right? It's Spencer Petras. It's Hawaii's starting quarterback, whose name escapes me at the moment, Colorado State. That's probably a top 12 defense in the country, but I don't know on that level.
Yeah.
If Clemson's healthy, that's a conversation.
Yeah.
Even Ohio State is an interesting question because they've been without some corners. Like, just fully go with Ohio State, your national champion. Just go.
Ohio State.
Next.
All right. Baz, B-A-Z.
Baz.
Which college's brand is most misaligned with their conference affiliation, Dan? You're a culture guy. Big on culture. I remember when Colorado joined the Pac-12, and there was just conversations galore
I think
about
it's a fit.
about how the culture of Boulder would fit or not fit with the Pac-12,
Yeah.
and I think it's fine. Obviously, they would prefer a much better college football season this year. We haven't even mentioned that Carl Durrell.
Have they started their season, Colorado? Is that a thing we've been able to nail down?
Yeah, we haven't even mentioned that Carl Durrell also lost his job amid the Paul Chryst news. But
By the way, you were right there with Colorado 0-12. You were right there during our Pac-12 preview. You're like, it brings me no pleasure in telling you this. Colorado may go winless. And now it's looking like it.
they're really bad.
I think
they're really bad.
I mean, when you look at their predicted outcomes, the advanced stats, I think have Colorado as 0-12, right?
yeah,
The percentage chance, so 0 wins is 48%, 1 win is 39, 2 is 11. There's a 2% chance that they win 3 games. It's all double-digit prediction losses the rest of their way. Oof.
brutal.
Yeah.
Which school is most misaligned with their conference affiliation?
Can I ask you a question? In response to this question, do you think Penn State is a natural cultural fit to the Big Ten? I think in terms
As
of
opposed to
they were independent before, but I just they have the history that seems so important. Like, there's so much lore involved with so many Big Ten teams historically, and I think that's a really good fit. But I'm just speaking from my experience and just seeing the amount of New Jersey and Philly at a Penn State tailgate, and then sort of matching that to what I experienced. I know a lot of the Big Ten schools attract people from New York, from California, whatever, Indiana and Wisconsin and Michigan, what have you. But it did seem different. And I actually think this about Rutgers in the Big Ten. I think this about Maryland in the Big Ten. And I think this about Nebraska in the Big Ten. That from the core of the conference, Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Indiana, Purdue, Minnesota, it is different going to a Nebraska game. It is different going to Rutgers. I've been to Piscataway. I have not been to a Rutgers game. It is different going to College Park. Like, Maryland is as ACC to me as any ACC team, but we're having this conversation about the Big Ten. So I think the newer additions to the Big Ten don't fully strike me as obvious, carryover from the other schools.
I mean, for sure, the culture of Penn State is unique in that it is an interesting hybrid between New York, Philly, and Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And you may not have that elsewhere around the conference. But Penn State's been in the Big Ten for so long that I think the culture there has grown around the Big Ten.
Right.
And though it may be a bit unique as compared to some of the other schools, just in terms of culture and fit and student body, what have you, I don't think like it feels that misaligned to me. The Maryland thing, I still screw up, kind of like I do with the Brewers being in the AL.
Right.
Like, I'm just never going to get used to
So the San Diego Chargers, right? Yes? No? Right. LA.
Or the Brewer,
Yeah.
or maybe I'm thinking of the Houston Astros. I
The
can't even get it
Astros. Yeah,
straight,
the Brewers made a move, I think, as well.
but whoever is in the AL now,
Yeah.
like I'm never going to get that straight. And I still get confused sometimes when we go through and we do our previews and recaps
Yeah.
about which conference Maryland is in, because it doesn't feel right. That's probably more of a me thing than anything else. I wanted to ask you,
But doesn't it seem like in a dream world in which we have 8-team conferences, and I'm not saying Penn State deserves this or should be in this, But just in terms of like, oh, this all sort of makes sense. This is all sort of a warm, sensical blanket when we look at the organization of the sport, the tapestry of smaller conferences. If there were a conference, like a upper ACC, Big East melding of like Penn State should be playing like Virginia Tech every year to me. I don't know why that is. Like a Syracuse, Penn State, Boston College, Pitt, like there is something to me that like brings all of like a tortilla would wrap that into a competitive burrito in a more interesting way culturally to me. Does that strike you as anything that makes sense, or am I just nutty?
I think you might be a little bit.
That's
nutty,
okay.
It's okay. I wanted to ask you about like Florida State.
Okay. And the ACC as opposed to the SEC or Big East. That hasn't existed in quite some time.
I mean, the Big East is long dead,
Yeah.
RIP. But Florida State and the SEC feels like much better of a fit.
Yeah, there is the weird thing where the Florida schools are in different conferences. Yes and no. Yes and no. Florida State doesn't have the long football history, right? Florida State football kind of started as a power with Bobby Bowden. So we're not going back a crazy way, and a lot of the SEC powers can go back. It would make sense, but I don't know, with the number of teams in the Southeast or East Coast or Southeastern, whatever, however we want to qualify, like they are a fit with Miami and all the North Carolina schools, it seems. When you start getting into the Northeast with Syracuse and Pitt and Boston College, that's a little bit weird. But at least with the Eastern Seaboard teams, like the Virginia schools, like there's a history there. It kind of seems like there's a fit. So I'm not as crazy about moving Florida State elsewhere because of fit, but I'm willing to listen.
Fair enough. So here's the final question for the public show. We're going to do the second half of this as part of our normal Q&A/Brew&A.
Yes.
That you and I would typically do and post out on Patreon, verballers.com every week. So if you want to hear the second half, that we've got some fun questions about Oklahoma, Halloween. I mean, just like the NCAA video game. Excuse me. We got a lot of fun stuff that comes after this. But final question here on the public show from Andrew. If you had to pick two people who you'd have on a Manning cast-like set for a big game, who would they be? So is the assumption that it's me and you and then two other people?
No, I think we're TV executives, and we're choosing this for ESPN, and it could be anybody, to not announce the game, but just sort of react and have conversation during the game, vaguely about the game or specifically about the game in different moments. Okay.
So other than two Greg McElroys, which is of course the answer,
double Mac.
What are we looking for here? I think what we're looking for to make it watchable is some balance of seriousness with silliness or personality, right? You obviously have to have people who can speak knowledgeably about the game of football, who can see what's going on and in real time break it down in a way that makes it interesting and relatable. Like one name that comes to mind who I wouldn't answer here, he's good at breaking things down, and I think he's been good in the role where they've deployed him, but he has a serious dryness to him, is a guy like an Urban Meyer. We don't want that on this.
No.
Okay, we need more personality. Somebody who can break things down in real time.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts that come to mind as you are a TV executive?
Yeah, I would say during the regular season, nobody. During the regular season, nobody, because I think to look at what the Mannings are doing and say that it's replicable, because they have the chemistry of being brothers, of being literal brothers, and teasing each other and going through their own experiences as... Is Eli Manning going to make the Hall of Fame? Quite possibly. Hall of Fame quarterbacks with that deep knowledge of the game, and especially with recent knowledge of the game, that they're only recently retired. I think that's pretty much impossible. All the good ones were already on TV networks, it seems, or on the radio, or doing something within the sport. What is most attractive to me would be in a national championship game or a playoff game or major bowl game, is to get two or three coaches doing the coaches round, whatever the round table show that they do, but specific ones who have played those teams, who've had success against those teams, that are like more tenured within that league. So if it's I don't know, I'm making this up, obviously. if it's a Georgia-Ohio State national championship this year, okay? And we get to have Jim Harbaugh and Nick Saban and Eli Drinkwitz, or you know what I'm saying, like, or James Franklin, when they're like, you know, when we were preparing to play this team, one of the interesting things was like we never saw them using the tight end like they started doing later on in the season, right? That there is interesting enough connective tissue with game planning for these teams, with being familiar with the coaches, with being longer term college football coaches, so they've kind of been there and seen it all. But you have different levels of experience, which is why I have like the Eli Drinkwitz, Nick Saban, Jim Harbaugh, where there's just one guy's been there forever, one guy's been there for a while, another guy's been there for only a couple years. I think that's fascinating, right? Where you start getting, you know, Dan Mullen would watch the national championship and be like, oh, they're going outside zone here again, where you get like guys being so familiar with the types of offenses that teams are running. And then in the commercial breaks, talking about like, oh man, it'd be weird to see if they stop running this sort of quarters look. That it doesn't have to be just about X's and O's, or during the commercial break, they're talking about recruiting Jalen Carter, recruiting Jackson Smith and Jigba, and like, great kid, weird dad, you know, obviously thrilled to see him having success at Ohio State, wish he had come to wherever. That to me is would be cool about having that alternate feed, having that sort of closeness to the teams involved in a big game.
Yeah, I like whatever you can put coaches in that position.
Get them a little tipsy.
Got to get them a little tipsy.
Yeah.
Get the get the inhibitions a little bit lower. But I've generally really liked the mega casts when they've done them.
Yeah,
and you tend to see some more coaching personality in that setting. Gary Patterson's always been a hoot.
Yeah, he's good.
He's always been a hoot.
Yeah.
If not a little intimidating. I'll never forget the time he was on set with Major Applewhite. Major Applewhite was like taking notes.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these coaches, you put them in a situation where they can really break things down and do so kind of off the cuff, and it's really impressive to watch. So I think I'm with you, just interesting combinations of coaches from varying levels of experience and programs around the country, I think would be really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know if you need that Luganville there to sort of organize it all, but obviously the Mannings don't need that host. I think they tried out hosts, ESPN did, to like work with the Mannings, and they were just like, we're good. We're just going to talk. Yeah. We're fine. I think that's the move. It's impossible because that's just, it's hurting cats to get those types of big names, because I'm sure there's bad blood about something with a lot of these guys, which is why you see a lot of random pairings. You're like, oh, I guess, why would Derek Mason and Mike Leach hate each other or something like that? So of course they're going to be in the same, like that. You'll have that. But with some of the bigger guys, it'd be great. It really would. They're weirdos in their own ways, and so maybe they're not going to be as fun-loving as the Mannings, but I think there is still potential there.
Head on over to verballers.com to check out the second half of this. We've got a bunch of fun questions left. Don't forget solidverballive.com, where you can go if you are ever so inclined to come and see us in New York City on Friday. Dan and I are hard at work in the laboratory putting together College Football, the game show. And last but not least, if you like the show, hit subscribe. Tell your friends to do so as well. Join us now over at verballers.com.
Yes, sir.
And we'll talk to you tomorrow with all things Week 6.